The day my ex-husband saw me pregnant at St. Catherine's Hospital, he did not look sad. He looked furious, as if my body had committed a crime by proving my life had continued without him. I was sitting outside the maternal fetal medicine suite with a paper cup of water sweating in my hand when Daniel Price appeared at the end of the corridor. He was with a young woman in a cream athleisure set who kept talking about a charity dinner in Tribeca. Daniel wore the navy suit he saved for boardrooms, depositions, and any place where he wanted people to remember he controlled an empire of luxury apartment towers. He had built Price Urban Development into one of the most recognizable real estate companies in New York. Or, more accurately, we had built it. But Daniel had been telling the world it was his story for so long that even I had once begun to believe him. Then he saw me. His attention slid past my face and stopped at the curve beneath my pale green coat. I was 48 years old, 6 months pregnant, and still getting used to the strange, tender certainty of having a daughter kick beneath my ribs. I had been afraid to hope for so long that each ultrasound felt like a private miracle. Beside me stood Jonah Ellis, my business partner and, for the past year, the man who had taught me that affection did not have to feel like a contract with hidden penalties. He had one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair while he scrolled through charts on his phone for an investment committee meeting we had scheduled after my appointment. Daniel walked toward us before I had decided whether I wanted him to. Claire. For 2 years, he had referred to me through lawyers, assistants, or our children. Hearing my name from his mouth in that hallway made an old reflex flicker through me. Once, I would have straightened my shoulders because I knew the exact expression he wanted from me: calm, grateful, available. This time I only looked at him. Daniel. Jonah stood and offered his hand. Daniel Price. Daniel shook it because nurses, patients, and a family with a stroller were watching. His smile did not reach his eyes. Ellis, he said. I didn't realize you were expecting. There are a lot of things you don't realize, I said. The woman beside him moved closer. She was limping slightly in high-end sneakers, and I remembered Daniel saying on the phone the previous Christmas that his girlfriend had hurt her ankle skiing in Aspen. Her name was Brielle, although he had never introduced us. Daniel, who is she? She asked. He paused just long enough to make the answer painful. My ex-wife. I watched Brielle study me. She looked curious, not cruel. I felt no jealousy. What I felt was a sharp memory of the woman I had been for 25 years, the one who reviewed lease agreements after our children were asleep, who found the zoning attorney who saved our first development, who hosted donors and council members in our home while Daniel collected credit for the conversations I had prepared him for. I had been the mother of his 2 children, the keeper of his public image, the quiet second brain behind his business. Then, when I stopped making his ego comfortable, I became outdated. A nurse opened the exam room door and glanced at the label on her tablet. Mrs. Price? Daniel's mouth tilted into the smallest smile. He held on to my old name as if it were a key he still owned. Harper, I corrected, my voice gentle. Claire Harper. The smile disappeared. Jonah took my folder, and I walked into the exam room without looking back. When the sonographer turned the monitor toward me, I saw our daughter's profile in grainy shades of silver. She had a tiny fist near her cheek. Her heartbeat filled the room, quick and steady. I cried, not because I was fragile but because the sound had once seemed impossible. Years earlier, when my daughter Mallory was finishing college and my son Evan was applying to graduate school, I had told Daniel I still wanted another child. I had said it quietly in our kitchen after a dinner where he spent an hour talking about legacy. He laughed as if I had tried to tell a joke. We're done with that stage, Claire, he said. I'm not going back to diapers because you're afraid of getting older. I had nodded then, because I had trained myself to make disappointment look civilized. But I did not stop wanting it. We had already gone through several difficult years trying to conceive. During our last IVF cycle, we created embryos. A medical complication forced us to pause before a transfer, and one embryo remained frozen. Daniel was impatient with every appointment, every bill, every question I asked. He wanted to move on. I wanted time. I did not know that while I was hoping to save our marriage, he was sleeping with a 24-year-old development associate who worked in his office. The affair was not a rumor. It was a series of humiliations arranged to make me feel unreasonable for noticing. There were hotel charges labeled as client dinners, texts that appeared on a shared iPad, and a photograph from a rooftop event where Daniel's hand was too low on her back. When I confronted him, he did not deny it for long. "You've been unhappy for years," he said. "You don't get to act shocked because I finally stopped pretending." He used money, attorneys, and carefully placed gossip to turn our divorce into a story about my supposed instability. He told mutual friends I had become obsessed with fertility and unable to accept reality. He offered me a beautiful lake house in Connecticut and a settlement large enough to make people say I should be grateful. He thought he was giving me a graceful place to disappear. I sold the house. I sold the jewelry he had chosen without ever asking what I liked. And I took back my maiden name. The settlement became the beginning of Harper Health Ventures, a fund focused on women's health, diagnostics, and biotechnology. The choice surprised everyone, including me. For years I had listened to doctors brush aside my fertility problems as the ordinary decline of an aging woman. Some were kind. Some were not. More than once, I walked out of an appointment feeling as if my body had failed a test no one had explained. After the divorce, I met Dr. Nina Alvarez, a reproductive endocrinologist and researcher whose small Boston lab was about to lose its funding. Her work did not promise miracles. It studied patterns in endometrial receptivity, hormone response, and individualized treatment plans that were often missed when women were rushed through standardized protocols. Nina spoke to me with the rigor of a scientist and the anger of someone who had watched too many patients blamed for gaps in medical knowledge. I invested in her lab because I was tired of women being told that their pain was inevitable, their questions were vanity, and their hopes were foolish. That lab became Lumen Reproductive Systems. 18 months later, I met Jonah when we both tried to invest in a small clinical data company called Verity Health Analytics. He was the founder of Ellis Systems, a technology company that built secure platforms for hospitals. We argued for 3 hours in a conference room over whether health data could be scaled without treating patients like inventory. At the end of the meeting, he did not invite me to dinner. He asked for my financial model. It was the first time in decades that a powerful man looked at me as an equal before he looked at me as a woman. That was why, in the hospital corridor, Daniel interpreted Jonah and my pregnancy using the only language he understood: possession, rivalry, and defeat. 3 days later, my general counsel, Priya Shah, called me before breakfast. "We have a problem," she said. Price Holdings filed a formal objection to the Ellis acquisition of Verity. I set down my coffee. "On what grounds?" "They claim the offer undervalues minority shareholders and puts the company's intellectual property at risk." I laughed once, without humor. Daniel owned 9% of Verity through an old real estate investment vehicle. It had been a small, passive stake he had forgotten about for more than a decade. He had never attended a shareholder meeting. He had never asked about the company's work. But his 9% was enough to delay the transaction, request audits, and create a public mess. Jonah was across from me in my office, reading the filing over my shoulder. His face hardened. "This isn't about me," he said. "No. It's about you." I looked through the glass wall toward the bright, noisy office of Harper Health. Researchers, analysts, and project managers moved between meetings. On one wall hung photos of women who had participated in Lumen's patient advisory program. They were teachers, nurses, engineers, mothers, women without children, women who had lost pregnancies, women who had been dismissed by specialists before finding someone willing to investigate. Daniel wanted to put me back in a cage. He did not know that this time the cage belonged to the woman he had tried to trap. To understand why Daniel's objection shook me so badly, you have to understand how carefully he had taught me to doubt my own competence. In the early years, it did not look like cruelty. It looked like admiration with conditions. He would introduce me at dinners as the reason I stay organized, then interrupt if I tried to explain the financing on a project. He would ask my opinion in private and present it at work as an idea he had just had. When I objected, he would kiss my forehead and say I was too sensitive to the way business worked. When we bought our first brownstone to renovate, I spent nights at the dining room table comparing permits, school zones, construction bids, and tenant demand. Daniel was charismatic, fearless, and unusually good at making people feel they were lucky to be included in his plans. I was patient with details. We needed both things. But when the project made money, the newspaper profile called him a visionary. I stood beside him in the photograph in a dress I had bought on sale, smiling like I was there by accident. I told myself it did not matter. We had a family. We had Mallory, then Evan. We had a business that paid for a comfortable life. I was raised by parents who believed loyalty was an achievement, and I mistook self-erasure for loyalty for much too long. The first time I saw the darker side of Daniel's success was when he fired his assistant, Lauren. Lauren had made an error in a calendar invite. It was small. Daniel called her into his office, closed the door, and spoke loudly enough that people outside could hear every word. Later, when I said he had humiliated her, he told me she should be grateful he had not fired her sooner. People either keep up or they don't, he said. I remember looking at him over the kitchen island and feeling a small, cold fear. It was not because he had yelled. It was because he saw no moral difference between an employee's mistake and a person's worth. By the time I discovered the affair, that way of thinking had reached our marriage. Daniel did not see himself as someone who had betrayed me. He saw himself as a man who had upgraded his life and expected the people around him to adjust. The divorce made that clear. His lawyer sent a draft settlement that offered money but demanded silence. I would keep the lake house, receive a substantial payment, and agree not to speak publicly about the marriage, his company, or the young woman from his office. The terms were designed to make any defense of myself sound like greed or bitterness. My divorce attorney, Elaine Brooks, was in her 60s and had the unhurried manner of someone who had watched very rich people confuse pressure with power. She read the document, took off her glasses, and said, "He wants you to mistake comfort for freedom." I had not slept for 2 nights. I was so angry I could barely drink water. "What do I do?" I asked. "We find out what you own. Not what he says you own. What you actually own." That sentence changed my life. For 6 weeks, Elaine's team collected records. They found emails where Daniel asked me to review financing packages. They found a handwritten spreadsheet from our first project that I had made in a black notebook. They found records showing I had guaranteed a line of credit when Price Urban was too new to qualify on its own. My name had been removed from most public-facing materials over time, but it was still in the foundation of the company. Daniel was furious when he learned we would not accept the first settlement. "You're trying to take everything I built," he said during a mediation session. "I'm trying to stop you from erasing what I built," I replied. The room became so quiet that I could hear the air conditioning. He tried another approach after that. He sent flowers. He offered to pay for a private doctor. He suggested we postpone the divorce until after Mallory's law school graduation so the family would look stable. Every offer carried the same hidden message: "Come back under my control and I will make your life comfortable again." I signed the final agreement 4 months later. It was not a victory movie moment. I was numb when I left the courthouse. I sat in the back of a cab, still wearing the gray suit Elaine had suggested, and watched the city pass in rain-streaked strips of light. For 25 years, I had been someone's wife. I did not yet know who Claire Harper was. The first thing I did was call Dr. Nina Alvarez. I had met Nina at a panel on disparities in fertility care. She had challenged a pharmaceutical executive who described patients over 40 as difficult to serve. Her voice never rose. She simply asked why women were called difficult when the industry had failed to study them properly. Afterward, I told her about my own years of dismissive appointments. She told me about her lab's grant ending in 3 months. "I can't guarantee outcomes," she said. "But I can guarantee we have more questions worth asking." I went to Boston the following week. Her lab was in a cramped renovated building near the hospital, with too many wires, too little storage, and a whiteboard full of equations I barely understood. There were 5 researchers, 2 aging freezers, and a feeling of stubborn purpose in every room. Nina walked me through their work slowly. They were studying why embryos that looked viable could fail to implant, how inflammatory markers and hormonal patterns could change a transfer protocol, and why patient histories were often treated as anecdotes instead of data. She was exacting about what the research could and could not claim. That honesty was what made me trust her. I did not fund the lab because I expected a child in return. I funded it because I knew what it felt like to sit in a paper gown while a stranger treated my grief as a scheduling inconvenience. If our work could prevent even one woman from leaving an appointment convinced that her body had betrayed her, it mattered. Harper Health began with that investment and 2 employees in a borrowed office. I learned private equity terms, negotiated with hospital systems, and made mistakes that kept me awake for days. I also discovered I was good at it. Not because I was naturally fearless, but because I had spent 25 years quietly learning how money moves through a room. I knew when a projection had risk. I knew how to prepare for an adversarial meeting. I knew the difference between a person who had a plan and a person who wanted applause for having one. Mallory and Evan watched this transformation from a respectful distance. Neither wanted to become a weapon in our divorce. I refused to make them one. When Daniel complained that I was poisoning them against him, I told him I would not explain his choices for him. They were adults. They had eyes. By the time Jonah and I met at the Verity meeting, I had stopped needing anyone to validate my seat at the table. But I had not stopped being startled when someone did. So when Priya called about Daniel's objection, the old fear returned for exactly one breath. The fear that he could take something I loved and turn it into a public referendum on whether I deserved it. Then Lily kicked beneath my hand. I looked at Jonah and said, "We're going to do this properly." For the next 48 hours, Daniel made the objection as expensive as possible. His attorneys demanded a new valuation. They questioned the security of Ellis Systems' clinical cloud. They leaked a story to a business reporter suggesting Jonah wanted to buy Verity's patents at a discount before a pending FDA review increased the company's worth. Verity's share price dropped. My phone filled with calls from worried limited partners. A patient advocate emailed to ask whether the funding for Lumen's next trial was in danger. I wanted to tell her it was not, but I had learned never to offer certainty before the facts earned it. Jonah wanted to make a statement. "We can go public with the valuation work. We can say he's retaliating." "Not yet," I told him. He looked at me carefully. "You don't owe him restraint." "This isn't restraint. It's timing. Let him think he has you cornered." The next day, Daniel requested a private meeting with Jonah in the executive suite of the Price Tower. I did not go. I wanted Daniel to hear the truth first from the man he saw as his opponent. Jonah carried 2 slim folders into Daniel's office. He told me later that Daniel received him behind a desk too large for the room, with the Manhattan skyline framed behind his shoulders. "Withdraw the acquisition," Daniel said, "and we can avoid months of litigation." Jonah placed the first folder on his desk. "Your problem is that you think this deal belongs to me." Daniel opened it. It contained Verity's shareholder table. His 9% appeared on the 4th line. The first line said Harper Health Ventures, 44%. "What is this?" Daniel asked. "The company's controlling shareholder." "Who controls Harper Health?" Jonah smiled, though not happily. "Claire." That was the first blow. Daniel had spent money trying to derail the company he thought belonged to the man beside his ex-wife. He had not understood he was attacking the most important asset she owned. Then Jonah placed the second folder on the desk. It held scientific publications, regulatory correspondence, and the investment history of Lumen Reproductive Systems. You think Claire became an investor after your divorce because she wanted to play executive, Jonah said. She funded the research that made her pregnancy possible. When Jonah told me about that moment, he said Daniel stopped breathing for a few seconds. The technology had not made me young. It had not promised a baby. It had helped my doctors see a clinical picture they had overlooked, a chronic inflammatory issue, a hormone response pattern, and a treatment approach that had been available only through Lumen's research program. I entered it with a clear understanding that it might fail. It did not. There was another truth Daniel did not know. The embryo I carried had been created during our last IVF cycle, before the divorce. Our consent forms had been painstakingly revised during settlement negotiations. Daniel had initially insisted that the embryo be discarded. I refused. In the final agreement, he relinquished his decision-making rights while I accepted all future costs and responsibilities. My attorney had warned me that he might regret it one day. I had not made the choice to hurt him. I had made it because I could not let him decide what happened to the last possibility I still held. The baby isn't mine, Jonah told Daniel. I'm Claire's partner. I'm her business partner. But I don't need to claim her history to love her. Daniel went pale. My daughter was not a trophy in a contest against him. She was a decision that had survived his contempt. Jonah pointed to the merger agreement. If you continue this objection, Harper can call an extraordinary shareholder vote. Claire has 44%. I have irrevocable voting agreements with another 31%. The physician board holds 8%. Your 9% cannot stop this transaction. Daniel closed the folder hard enough to make the water glass on his desk jump. She's using you to humiliate me. Claire has not mentioned you in a single meeting, Jonah said. You did this to yourself. Jonah came back to my office just before sunset. He found me at the small round table where our team held working sessions, surrounded by printouts, a half-eaten apple, and an infant care booklet the hospital had given me that morning. Priya was on speakerphone. Nina had joined from Boston. The five of us had been dissecting Daniel's filing line by line. He knows? I asked Jonah. He knows the important parts. For a second, no one spoke. Then Nina said, good. Now he can't pretend this is a dispute between two men. That was always the danger with Daniel. He reduced every conflict to a contest he could understand. If I did something, it had to be because I wanted to punish him. If Jonah supported me, it had to be because he wanted to own me. He had no category for a woman building a life whose center was not him. Priya cleared her throat. We still need to treat his objection seriously. He has made allegations, and some reporters will repeat them without understanding the science. She was right. We prepared a factual response about Verity's valuation and Ella Systems' data security. We offered to release the independent reports to shareholders. We invited an outside audit of the clinical data protections. But we did not make Daniel's personal obsession the headline. I did not want a story about a divorced couple fighting in the business pages. I wanted the story to remain about the work. That decision cost us. For 2 days, the news cycle made Jonah look defensive and made Harper Health look secretive. A commentator on a cable business show asked whether I was emotionally compromised because I was pregnant and involved with Jonah. I watched the clip once, then turned it off before I gave it the power to ruin my afternoon. Still, the comments found their way to me. People wrote that I was too old to be a credible mother. Others said I was too privileged to complain about anything. A few called my pregnancy a publicity stunt. The cruelty of strangers should not have surprised me, but I had spent years hearing women blamed for their own medical histories. I knew how easily people turned a complicated life into a sentence they could dismiss. That night, I sat on the floor of Lily's unfinished nursery with a paint sample in one hand and my phone in the other. Jonah found me there. "You don't have to read that," he said. "I know." "Then why are you?" I wanted to tell him it was because, somewhere inside, I still believed that if I read every accusation I could prepare a response strong enough to make people understand me. Instead I handed him the phone. "Because Daniel has always been good at making a room feel like it agrees with him," I said. Jonah sat beside me, careful not to make a grand gesture of comfort. "The room is bigger now," he said. "And it does not belong to him." The next morning, a letter arrived from Daniel's lawyers. It was addressed to me personally, not Harper Health. They alleged that I had used confidential knowledge from our marriage to influence the Verity acquisition. The claim was absurd. Daniel's old investment vehicle had owned the 9% stake long before I began investing in women's health, and every transaction record was public. But the point was not to win. The point was to exhaust me. Elaine Brooks, my former divorce attorney, came to the office that afternoon. I had not seen her in more than a year. She walked in carrying a yellow legal pad and looked exactly as composed as she had at our mediation. "I heard Daniel is confusing nuisance with strategy again," she said. I hugged her before I could stop myself. Elaine reviewed the letter, then asked Priya for the original settlement exhibits. An hour later she found what she was looking for, a complete disclosure schedule attached to our divorce agreement. Daniel had signed a document acknowledging the existence of his passive Verity stake, its separate legal ownership, and my lack of management authority over it. His new claim directly contradicted his own sworn statement. "Can we use this?" I asked. "We can use it if he keeps lying," Elaine said. "And if he does, the court will not like it." I felt the old instinct to keep it quiet. Daniel had spent years making me believe that drawing a boundary was the same as creating conflict. But then I thought about the women who trusted Harper Health with their savings, their research, and their stories. Being dignified did not mean being defenseless. We prepared a motion for sanctions but did not file it yet. Priya called it our last card. I called it proof that I had finally learned to keep one. Daniel, meanwhile, went after Verity's employees. A senior analyst received a message from a recruiter offering a job at a Price Urban subsidiary. The offer was generous and strangely specific. In exchange, the analyst was asked to discuss internal concerns about the acquisition. She forwarded it to Jonah. The analyst's name was Carmen Wells. She was 31, brilliant, and visibly shaken when she came to my office. "I didn't tell them anything," she said. "But I need you to know they were asking how stressed everyone is and whether the board is covering up risk." "You did exactly the right thing," I told her. "I'm afraid they'll make it sound like I'm the problem." Her fear was familiar. Daniel's talent was not merely intimidation. It was making people feel isolated before he ever threatened them directly. Jonah and I met with Verity's leadership that evening. We told them what was happening and offered paid legal support to anyone contacted improperly. We gave them the choice to remain anonymous in the investigation. We did not ask anyone to be brave for our benefit. We asked them to be safe. That was the difference between the company Daniel built and the one I wanted to build. He treated people as leverage. I wanted people to remain people, even when the stakes were high. The recruiter's messages led us to something larger. Priya's investigator found that the recruiter worked through a consulting firm quietly retained by Price Holdings. More troubling, the firm had drafted a proposed media brief before Daniel filed his first objection. The document framed me as a volatile former spouse and Jonah as a tech billionaire exploiting an emotional relationship. It included quotes attributed to unnamed friends. One quote mentioned my pregnancy before the hospital encounter, which meant someone had been watching more closely than I realized. I read the brief in silence. The words were polished, clinical, and cruel. They took every private loss in my life and rearranged it into a weapon. Jonah reached for the folder. We can release this. Not yet, I said, though my hands were shaking. Claire. If we release it before we can prove who approved it, Daniel will call it a fabrication. I want the proof. The proof came from an unexpected place. Brielle emailed me. Her message had no subject line. It said only, I think I have something you should see. I am sorry. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes. My first instinct was suspicion. My second was anger. Then I remembered her expression in the hospital corridor. She had looked frightened when Daniel said I was his ex-wife, as if she knew there was a history she had not been told. I met her in the back corner of a quiet cafe in Soho. She wore sunglasses even though it was raining, and she kept twisting a napkin between her fingers. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said before I sat down. I knew you existed. I didn't know what he did to you. He said you left because you wanted a different life. He said you hated being a mother and hated his business. The lie was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because he told me to delete some emails. And because he got angry when he found out I'd met you at the hospital. She slid a flash drive across the table but did not push it toward me dramatically. It rested beside my untouched tea. His assistant forwarded his messages to me by mistake. He asked a PR consultant to make you look unstable. He said the baby would make people question your judgment. I saved them because I was scared. I did not touch the drive immediately. Are you safe? I asked. Brielle looked down. I'm moving out tonight. I called Elaine from the sidewalk after we left. She arranged for a domestic abuse advocate to speak with Brielle, not because Daniel had hit her, Brielle said he had not, but because control often arrived long before violence and deserved to be taken seriously. The emails on the drive were authentic. They connected Daniel directly to the consulting firm, the employer recruitment effort, and the proposed smear campaign. They also revealed something he had tried to hide. He had instructed one attorney to explore whether my embryo consent agreement could be made public, even though it was sealed with our divorce records. The thought of him treating Lily's origin as opposition research made me physically sick. That was when I stopped thinking of this as a corporate dispute. It was a boundary. Priya filed the sanctions motion the next morning. We did not leak the private medical information. We did not publish Brielle's name. We filed only what was necessary, the documented false claims, the interference with employees, and the evidence that Daniel's legal objection was retaliatory rather than financial. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing 2 days before the extraordinary vote. Daniel arrived at the courthouse with his legal team and no expression at all. Across the hall, he caught my eye. For years, that look would have made me feel 2 inches tall. This time I rested my hand over my stomach and held his gaze. He had wanted to make me afraid of my own life. Instead, he had reminded me exactly what I was willing to protect. The hearing lasted less than 90 minutes, but it gave me the clearest view I had ever had of Daniel's method. His attorney tried to isolate each act until it looked harmless. The recruiter was independent. The PR brief was only a draft. The false allegation was a misunderstanding. The embryo inquiry was simply due diligence. Elaine stood and joined the documents together with a calm I envied. She did not call Daniel a monster. She did not need to. She showed the court the timeline. Daniel saw me at the hospital, filed an objection 3 days later, approved a campaign to question my stability, encouraged pressure on Verity employees, and pursued sealed medical information that had no bearing on the acquisition. This is not due diligence, Elaine said. It is retaliation dressed in a suit. Daniel stared straight ahead. The judge did not decide the entire case that day, but she ordered Price Holdings to preserve all communications with the consulting firm, barred contact with Verity employees outside formal channels, and warned Daniel's counsel that any attempt to disclose sealed reproductive records would have serious consequences. It was not a dramatic victory. It was better. It was a judge putting a boundary into the public record. When we walked outside, reporters were waiting behind barricades. I had prepared a statement with Priya, but the microphones and cameras still made my heart thump hard. "Ms. Harper," one reporter called, "is this personal?" I stopped because I did not want to run from the question. "I'm protecting a company that employs people, supports research, and serves patients," I said. "My personal life is not a loophole for anyone to use against that work." Then I left. That evening, I went to a Lumen advisory meeting. I almost cancelled. I was exhausted, and I knew cameras might be outside the building. But 12 women were coming to tell us what our new clinic intake process felt like from the patient's side. If I allowed Daniel to make me hide from the work, he would have won a piece of what he wanted. The meeting was held around a long table with soup, notebooks, and too many tissues. One woman, a 43-year-old paramedic named Denise, explained that she had spent 5 years hearing she was too stressed to conceive. Another said she had been told to lose weight before anyone ran a basic test. A young teacher described how grief after a miscarriage had made her avoid doctors entirely. I did not tell them about the hearing. I did not make their evening about me. But as I listened, I remembered why I had begun. The work was never a distraction from my divorce. It was the truest answer to it. Daniel had reduced me to a role. This work asked women to be fully seen. Near the end, Denise looked at me and said, "I read that article about you. I hope you don't let them make you ashamed." The room went quiet. "I'm trying not to," I said. "Good," she replied. "Because I'm tired of people thinking a woman's private pain disqualifies her from doing public good." I carried that sentence with me for the rest of the week. Daniel did not withdraw his objection after the hearing. Instead, he called the extraordinary vote an attempt to silence a minority shareholder. He sent letters to people I knew from my old social life. One former neighbor texted me that Daniel had been telling people Jonah was trying to take advantage of me while I was vulnerable. I deleted the message after replying, "Thank you for letting me know." Then I called Mallory and Evan. I had avoided involving them in the details, but I would not let Daniel use ignorance as a way to recruit them. We met in my apartment on Sunday. Mallory flew in from Chicago after a deposition. Evan came home from Seattle with takeout from the Thai place he loved as a teenager. Both looked older than I remembered and, suddenly, still like my babies. I put the court order, the shareholder summary, and a timeline of events on the dining table. I told them they did not have to read any of it. I told them I did not want them to hate their father for me. I only wanted them to have the facts if he asked them to take sides. Mallory read every page. Evan paced by the windows, then sat down and read them too. "He knew about the embryo agreement?" Evan asked. "He signed it," I said. "And he tried to use it against you?" His attorneys asked questions they had no right to ask. Mallory pressed her lips together. "Mom, you should have told us he was doing this. I didn't want you to carry it. You carried Dad's version of things for years so we wouldn't have to," she said. "That isn't fair to you either." I did not know what to say. Sometimes the deepest kindness from your children is not protection. It is permission to stop protecting everyone else. Evan came around the table and kissed the top of my head. "We love Dad," he said. "But loving him doesn't mean we pretend he's right." After they left, I stood in Lily's nursery and cried quietly. Not because I wanted them to reject their father, but because they had finally seen me without the filter he had placed between us. The vote was scheduled for Tuesday. On Monday night, Daniel came to my apartment. That afternoon, Daniel called Mallory and Evan. He expected them to take his side because, in his mind, children were proof that a man's version of a family still carried weight. Mallory called me afterward. She was a 26-year-old attorney in Chicago and had inherited my habit of sounding calm when she was furious. "Dad says Jonah is manipulating you," she told me. "And what did you say?" I said Jonah doesn't run Harper Health. Evan joined the call from Seattle, where he worked in health policy research. "We've been on Mom's advisory council for a year," he said. "We know exactly what she built." I had never hidden my work from my children. I had simply refused to make them choose between their parents. Daniel did not understand the difference. That night, he appeared unannounced at my apartment building in Chelsea. The front desk manager called me from the lobby. "Mr. Price is insisting on seeing you." I told her to send him up. Jonah was at an industry dinner and Priya was 2 blocks away in case I needed her, but I did not want to make a spectacle. I wanted Daniel to see me where I lived now, in a light-filled apartment filled with books, research reports, Mallory's photographs, Evan's framed college sketch, and a changing table waiting in the room that used to be my office. Daniel stepped inside with the anger of a man who had always been allowed to enter. "Was all of this supposed to be revenge?" he asked. "No." "The fund? The lab? The baby? Jonah?" I stood slowly. Pregnancy had changed my balance, but it had also clarified something in me. I no longer wanted to shrink just to make another person's anger easier to manage. "The saddest thing about you, Daniel, is that you still think every choice I make is about you." His eyes went to my stomach. "That child. Do not talk about her as if she is an asset you misplaced." For the first time I saw something different in his face. Not rage. Fear. "Pull the deal," he said. "No. I can destroy Ellis systems. I can make people ask questions he can't answer. Then you'll have to explain why you started a corporate war 48 hours after you saw your ex-wife pregnant." He went still. I opened the door. "You have until tomorrow morning to withdraw the filing." "And if I don't?" "Tomorrow you'll understand why you should never have mistaken my silence for weakness." The extraordinary meeting began at 10 o'clock the next morning in Verity's conference center near Hudson Yards. Daniel arrived with 4 attorneys and the confidence of a man used to everyone negotiating before anyone dared oppose him. I was already seated at the head of the table. He stopped when he saw me. "Good morning, Daniel." The screen behind me displayed the full ownership structure. Priya explained, without drama, that Harper Health was exercising its voting rights and that 83% of shareholders had agreed the acquisition would give Verity the capital, international distribution, and clinical infrastructure it needed. Independent advisors had reviewed the price. The patient board supported the deal. The physicians who had built the company wanted their work protected, not frozen inside a public fight. Daniel understood he had lost before he sat down. "This is an ambush," he said. "No," I replied. "It's a vote." One of his attorneys requested a recess. The chair denied it. Then Daniel reached for the only weakness he thought he could still exploit. "Mrs. Harper has an obvious emotional conflict," he said. "She is personally involved with Mr. Ellis." Jonah did not move. I did. "My personal relationship was disclosed to the board months ago," I said. "I recused myself from the independent valuation. 3 outside firms approved the price. Do you want to discuss data, Daniel, or do you want to discuss my private life because you have nothing else?" No one answered. The vote passed. But the decision that mattered most to me came afterward. I announced that Harper Health would not sell all its Verity shares. We would retain a significant position in the combined company, and I would use a portion of my proceeds to expand Lumen's diagnostic access program in New York, Cleveland, and Phoenix. Daniel looked at me then as if he had finally seen the actual scale of what he tried to stop. It was not only money. He had attacked a project that could help thousands of women because he could not stand that I was happy. After the meeting, his attorneys began gathering papers. Daniel remained in his chair. "Claire, wait." Everyone else left. "Why didn't you ever tell me you could do all this?" he asked. The question made me unexpectedly sad. "I did tell you for 25 years, I said. You called my ideas help. You called my analysis opinions. You called my work support. He looked down. I built Price Urban. And I was there when we mortgaged our first home to save your first project. I reviewed contracts. I found tenants. I raised our children while you traveled. I never needed a medal, Daniel. I only needed you not to confuse my loyalty with inferiority. He had no answer. Weeks later, Daniel withdrew his legal action and sold his 9% in the transaction. His company did not collapse. That was not my justice. My justice was that he would continue living with every luxury he valued while knowing he could not buy back the life he had dismissed. The work moved forward almost immediately. Verity's engineers began integrating their diagnostic platform with Ellis Systems' secure hospital network, while Lumen opened its first patient navigation office in Queens. I visited during the soft opening in a loose cream dress and flat shoes, 8 months pregnant and more tired than I admitted in public. The waiting room had windows, comfortable chairs, and a small private room for anyone who needed to cry without feeling watched. Those details mattered to me from the beginning. Nina met me at the door wearing scrubs and a smile. You realize you are not supposed to be lifting boxes, she said. I'm carrying a clipboard, I told her. You are carrying an entire person and a clipboard. The first patient we met that day was a bus driver named Kendra. She had been trying to get an answer for 4 years and had arrived early because she did not trust anyone to give her the appointment time correctly. Our navigator sat with her for nearly an hour before she saw a doctor. When Kendra left, she hugged the navigator and said, "This is the first place where nobody acted like I was wasting their time." I went home thinking about that sentence. Daniel had tried to make the company fight feel like the defining battle of my life. But it was only an obstacle on the road to what we were building. The clinic, the trials, and the women who would be listened to were the point. Jonah came in late that night carrying soup and a stack of papers he immediately put away when he saw my face. Long day? He asked. A good day, I said. A real one. He kissed my forehead. He never told me I had to be grateful for him. He never made care into a debt. In the quiet after he fell asleep, I understood that love could be ordinary in the best way, a person bringing soup, respecting a closed door, and believing your life belonged to you. Brielle left him soon after. I did not do anything to make it happen. She simply realized that Daniel still spent too much of his emotional life trying to control a story that had ended. Mallory told me Brielle looked exhausted when they passed each other at a gallery opening. I hoped she found a way out before she learned the hard lessons I had spent years learning. Our children did not abandon Daniel, but they stopped protecting his ego. Mallory said something to him that she later repeated to me. Mom didn't win because you lost, she said. Mom won because she stopped asking you for permission. 4 months later, my daughter, Lily Harper, was born just before sunrise. Jonah stayed beside me through every hour of labor. Mallory and Evan arrived with flowers and spent 20 minutes arguing about who would hold their sister first. When the nurse placed Lily on my chest, I cried in a way I had not cried during the divorce. It was not the victory of a woman proving she could still become a mother. It was the peace of a woman who had stopped living under the definition another man made of her. Months later, Verity's integration with Ellis Systems funded new clinical trials and expanded Lumen's platform. A national business magazine printed a photograph of me holding Lily outside our new patient center. The headline called me the investor who turned a second life into better care for women. Daniel saw it in an airport lounge. I know because Evan was traveling with him that day. According to my son, Daniel looked at the cover for a long time and then said, "I thought her life ended when she left." Evan answered, "No, Dad. Only the part that belonged to you ended." When Evan told me, I did not feel triumph. I felt closure. One afternoon, I took Lily to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Jonah walked beside me while she slept in her stroller, her tiny hand curled against a blanket. The air smelled like wet earth and new leaves. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. I thought about 25 years of marriage, my children, the betrayal, the divorce, nights spent studying clinical reports, and the first time I heard Lily's heartbeat. Yes, I said. I regret taking so long to understand that starting over does not mean I failed before. Jonah took my hand. For too long, I had believed power meant convincing someone to stay. Daniel taught me, without meaning to, that it did not. Real power was being able to leave, rebuild, and create something no one could take from me. My company was not born to punish my ex-husband. My daughter was not born to prove him wrong. My happiness defeated him only because it did not need to destroy him in order to exist. And when Lily woke in the stroller and opened her dark, searching eyes, I understood one more thing. The future did not ask whether I had earned it through suffering. It was simply there, waiting for me to meet it with both hands open. I bent over the stroller, and she wrapped her tiny fingers around one of mine. Jonah smiled, the garden light moved through the trees, and for the first time in years I did not feel as though I had to explain why I deserved that peace. I simply carried it with me.